like crypto is basically just a social club. Like, and that is basically what matters most about crypto. The tech is cool. The tech, it's a good thing that it exists, probably. And it's a good thing that, like, Ethereum is resilient. But, like, the main thing that Ethereum produces is just this sort of hive mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great theory.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes total sense. Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Story, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week I'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves. Yeah, welcome to I think it's the 5th episode or 6th episode of Beyond the Beat, conversations about crypto media. Joined today by one of my favorite journalists or writers, Daniel Kuhn. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'd love to get, before we dive into your experience as a prolific op-ed writer and now your new role at the block, I'd love if you can tell me a little bit about your journey through crypto. Like, what were you doing before you got involved, and what drew you to such depth that you decided that covering crypto as a journalist was the career path you wanted to take?
So I first started paying attention to crypto during like beginning months of 2017 because I had a friend who was deeply involved in it, and he convinced me to buy Bitcoin. And then as the market ramped up over the summer, over the fall, got further involved. We worked together at the time. We were both working at a wine store. And we had a lot of downtime, so we just like stared at screens all day. And made a lot of money, lost a lot of money when things eventually came down. And then I started doing a journalism grad program at NYU, and I needed an internship to graduate, and I ended up at CoinDesk. And so that was a 6-month internship, and it turned into a full-time job, and so I've been involved ever since.
Nice. When you first discovered it, did you immediately understand it? Or, I mean, obviously understanding it is a complete journey, but were you immediately raptured by it? Or was it also those sort of, like for me, it took a well over 6 months to properly understand like why I should even pay more attention to it.
Yeah.
Was that like same experience?
You mean like on a philosophical level?
Yeah.
No, like especially when I first was basically a day trader, I did not understand decentralization or why it mattered at all. And that actually took quite a bit of time. And I think I had to write about it to like actually appreciate what was happening.
Do you remember the first thing that you wrote about, or what one of your first pieces was? Maybe it was something that not necessarily for CoinDesk, but something for yourself.
I think the first piece that I wrote that probably mattered was I interviewed this Russian emigre, Katie Anina, who's actually speaking at Bitcoin 2024.
Plan B.
Yeah, Plan B. Yeah. So she runs this company where she helps people get second passports or basically like dissolve their citizenship to live in sort of like tax advantage nations. And yeah, I think that was probably the first piece that I wrote that was somewhat significant.
And then after writing, did you have a past as a writer already? Or was that your introduction into writing more broadly?
No. CoinDesk and now the blog are basically my only experience in media. I had a separate internship at a trade publication about financial planning. That was a pretty short stint. But I knew I wanted to be a writer, which is why I went to grad school. I sent out like hundreds of applications to publications and like just did not hear back. I had a single interview with the James Beard Foundation because I worked in the wine industry and I thought it'd be somewhat of a natural fit.
And then so CoinDesk was your first job in crypto.
Yeah.
What were you thinking when you joined the ranks there? Did you expect what were your initial thoughts when you joined them?
I don't know exactly what I expected. When I joined, CoinDesk was very different than what it is now. And CoinDesk now is very different than like the vast majority of my career. I've always said that CoinDesk is probably one of the few companies in crypto like today that you could write a book about, and there'd be like enough there that people would care about, like Coinbase and Binance and all of that. Correct about Ethereum and even Solana nowadays. But just the story of CoinDesk itself is incredible. So I joined when it was still very much in a startup phase, even though it was it's probably about 5 or 6 years old. It was still a small newsroom, still sort of like a flat architecture to some extent. And then things ramped up very quickly.
Yeah. When you first joined CoinDesk, like this idea of the flat hierarchy, or at least like to some degree, did it feel like crypto, like the ethos of crypto, the sort of non-hierarchical nature, at least obviously in the theory? Obviously in the practice, it'll be a lot different, both at CoinDesk and crypto as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's hard to say. I mean, we did have an editor-in-chief. We did have like an editorial structure. But we were all very scrappy, I felt, at the time.
Did you have, like in those early days, because you were just starting out, did you have the freedom to write about the majority of stuff that you wanted? Like I'm thinking about that sort of timeline until you became an op-ed writer or majority op-ed writes. Was that from day one, or did you have to sort of migrate into that position?
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting because I started as a news writer, and like as an intern, you're basically a generalist. Like you take the stories that your editors recommend or that you find, and so you end up writing about everything. And so you can develop a niche, and a lot of people do by matter of circumstances. I was working under John Biggs, and then they hired Ben Schiller, who used to be the editor-in-chief of Breaker Mag, who I'm sure you know. And so when I started working under Ben, that was the idea was to do more voicey, more long-form type of stuff, but it was still a generalist position. And so I think I've always basically been a generalist.
Because how long were you op-ed, like specifically op-ed for CoinDesk?
I'd say in between like 3.5 and 4 years, specifically writing sort of column lead type of pieces. I think it only like truly became a thing when David Morris joined. And he joined as, I think the title was Chief Insight Columnist. And so we were both writing for the Node newsletter. But in a lot of ways, he sort of defined what the job was.
Are there any specific stories that or columns that you're particularly proud of that you look back on as, like, 'cause something that I think about often is what's the impact of the story going to be? And sometimes they're really interesting stories that might be complete flops because, the market just doesn't care and the reader doesn't care, but I care. And then sometimes the stories that just hit it off and and I'm not particularly, like, sometimes you just have to write stories that might resonate, but you don't necessarily resonate. Do any stories like that come to mind?
I think journalists like to be proven right a lot of times, especially when they're sort of making predictions. And I think this is sort of something that kind of came to fruition. But it was a piece about how Bitcoin is probably going to become like a right-wing issue, like a right-wing talking point, sort of responding to progressive Bitcoiners at the time, saying like, like Elizabeth Warren really embraces technology. I just thought that was sort of a ridiculous statement.
Yeah, I mean, and especially if we're in Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville and Trump is meant to talk in just a couple of days, I feel like that prediction is coming particularly true now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems very unstable right now. Like, it's possible. Who knows what could happen?
Yeah,
but
I was thinking about this. Like, do you think that Trump is appealing to the voters, or do you think that Trump is appealing to the donors?
Yeah, I think it's more of the donors. I don't necessarily think you could trust Trump. I mean, what do you think about the idea of Kamala possibly speaking at the conference?
I mean, I feel like for her it would probably be an electoral loss. It would feel like you're responding to Trump because Trump is going, I have to go, and that feels like you would just be like a little bit on a losing ground. So in that, I'd be interested just because it would be just fascinating to see, especially given the overall like hype of the election and how everything has gone down in the past week. So I think it would be brilliant. But at the same time, I think electorally, it would be a mistake on her end to accept the invitation. That's just, how I view it.
Yeah. I think that's possible. There is an interesting thought that I read from Brian Greene. He used to write for The Intercept, and he's talking about how like Kamala ascending basically to the nomination, being like a very blank slate, and how there's like a lot of enthusiasm behind her, and how like I think a lot of Democratic voters or independent voters are basically willing to wipe the slate clean. And so I wonder if that's possible also for the crypto vote.
I feel like it's an interesting question, because I also think that the crypto vote is also different from the Bitcoin vote. And like the hardcore Bitcoiners here are different than what, for example, like the quote unquote Web3 person might vote, or because I think that the hardcore Bitcoiner might be not always, but a little bit more conservative, a little bit more right leaning. It just feels a little bit more Trump than it would Kamala Harris.
Definitely.
But I do think that she has a really good opportunity to sort of reverse trend on everything Biden has done and what, like Gensler has done and Elizabeth Warren even, and all these people. I feel like she, like you say, she's got the opportunity of a clean slate.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see if she actually takes that opportunity, or she just doesn't know what to do with it and fumbles it.
Yeah. I was getting kind of depressed thinking about like covering the election, but I think things have changed, and it'll be more interesting to see what happens.
In that sense, do you think that like crypto media has done a good job of covering the whole hype that Trump is generating, the hype that what Biden might have been doing, and the whole electoral or campaign process?
Yeah, I think so. So it's a shitty thing to say. But like a lot of times, like articles sort of follow the narratives that develop on crypto Twitter. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, I think it's just reality. I was just chatting about that today, about like, what do you think? Do you think that news is born on Twitter, or do you think that Twitter just like amplifies the news? Because that's a question that I always have. And I think a lot of like me as a journalist, and I know at the Defiant, we've had conversations about trying to like stop leaning so heavily on Twitter for sources or for news stuff. But at the end of the day, you just gravitate towards it naturally because that's where the whole...
That's where everyone is, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of both. Like, news does break on Twitter, and it is often worth covering. I think reporting on opinions is also sort of a valuable thing in itself, like, because you're just basically creating a time capsule. But I like the idea of not leaning on Twitter for stories and like actually picking up the phone and calling people and trying to break news the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. What percentage of news do you think gets broken that way?
A little bit. I mean, I've been trying to do that more often. It was a small mini scoop to some extent, but like I spoke to Cyberpunk Holdings, and they told me that they were like vastly increasing their Solana bags. You know, my ex-colleague Danny Nelson was also like incredibly good at just generating scoops the old-fashioned way, and same with Nick Day. But they were sort of focused on different areas of the industry.
It's tough because, like, I think about it sometimes as a up-and-coming journalist, then it takes time to build up that source base and get those contacts and be able to sort of tap into
ground level of what's going on so you can start building out the stories. And you have to eventually, like starting out, you have to rely on the Twitter, you have to rely on certain like Telegram groups or like Discord servers or that sort of stuff to sort of, start to make your contacts and that sort of stuff. It's a strange position to be in because, you also end up relying on like a lot of possibility of disinformation, like fake news, rumors, that it's really tough to sort of discern which one is true and which one isn't.
Yeah. I think regardless of how you go about things, like your source development process as a beginning crypto journalist will probably happen a lot on Twitter.
How would you get sources, especially considering op-eds? Because op-eds are a completely different ballgame than just like straightforward news stories. Like obviously scoops sort of fall in between the two. But as an op-ed writer, how would that go?
And so I'll give you an example. So the very last piece that I wrote for CoinDesk, my swan song, I was arguing that crypto should stay niche. And so like I reached out to a few people who I knew would probably disagree with that proposition. I would say, hey, I want you to disagree with this. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Did you ever doubt that position? Like, did anybody say anything that made you rethink your perspective?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I got a whole range of... So I wrote my whole thing, and then the second half of the article was basically like everyone telling me why I was wrong. And it's hard to disagree with everything that they said.
Like, this is a question that I always ask myself, is if we're too self-serving. And obviously there's sometimes like squabbles between media companies. And I know that at the block, there's sometimes they take the piss out of, I don't know, Decrypt and that sort of stuff. But do you think that, how do you think that the media industry does with that sort of disagreeing side of things? Or do you think at the end of the day, we're just very self-serving? We're all on this sort of understanding that we are a quote unquote trade publications or trade industry, and that, most news is news for everybody, and that's the end of it.
I sort of think that it's basically an attention game. So I even think that the hardcore critics like Caspian C or Bennett Tomlin or Molly White, even though that they're deeply critical of the industry, the fact that they're writing about it is actually beneficial for it. Like I think there is probably a period of time where I would probably categorize myself as sort of like a propagandist.
Do you think that, like, thinking about picking up that decentralization idea, do you think that the media industry suffers from a centralization problem? Because I know that, like, the majority of news is probably condensed between CoinDesk or the Block, Cointelegraph, and then off it goes into sort of another tier like Blockworks, the Defiant. I guess Decrypt is probably up at the top as well. But do you think that there's also sort of need for decentralization in the media industry? Whichever way, I mean, I'm not sure how we can fix it, because at the end of the day, it depends on the readers and where they're getting their information and what kind of news we're breaking.
I think things have gotten slightly better recently. Like, the Defiant has always been very well defined, you know, like, they've always been specifically focused on DeFi. And every once in a while, they'll do like a story that everyone else is covering. But I think with the emergence of DL News and Blockworks, I think people are actually trying to pursue original work. And it just so happens that like sometimes there is just like a handful of stories that you have to cover, right?
How do you think that you can balance that out? Because there's a question of speed versus, for example, like analysis. So you've got like breaking news, and then you've got the day after analysis. So like, and I know that that's the focus that DL News takes, because they just don't have the manpower right now to just be breaking.
Yeah.
Do you think that, where do you stand on that sort of balance? Like, do you think that speed is as important as what most media publications give it, or would you like lean more towards, now we need some more day after analysis, something more fleshed out, something a little bit more thought out?
I mean, it's hard to say, because if you look at the metrics, like basically no one reads crypto news at all. Like even at CoinDesk, like sometimes you're lucky to get a few hundred readers, right? So it is sort of a shame that we're all sort of playing the SEO game, and so like the depressing take is like long form stuff isn't read, and so why should you write it? But at the same time, like it isn't, like there are people that care about it, and it should be a part of every organization. But what I like to do is try to do like day twos on day one, I'm trying to get like the analytical take as early as possible, because I think speed is of the essence. And if you could sort of like balance it too, then that is best.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder I understand the logic behind speed is the essence, but then at the same time, I guess it's more the ideologue in me that's like frustrated because of this like constant and just relentless turnover of news, and like we need to be first, when sometimes it's like, nah, shouldn't we pause, think, and then put something out there?
What's that news organization, like Turtle or something, where they focus on slow news? Or
I'd never heard of them.
I don't know. It's good stuff. I mean, I don't always read it, but I don't know. I mean, there are organizations like ProPublica where they spend months, reporting on something, and I think there are investigations that should happen in crypto, and I think they are happening to some extent.
Does any publication come to mind that you think is doing a good job on that end? I mean, obviously, it's okay to talk about the competition in good faith, even though sometimes it's tough to do it. But do you think, any publications come to mind in the crypto industry that do the job well done in that sense?
Yeah, I would say, like obviously CoinDesk has a ton of reporters that are like willing to do weeks-long or month-long investigations. I think Decrypt and Cointelegraph both have like really interesting magazine portions.
What do you think as a media industry we're doing unequivocally wrong?
It's hard to answer without like citing specific examples. I mean, going back to what we were talking about, I think it is sort of stupid that we're all basically covering the same 5 stories, and basically also in the same exact way. Unequivocally wrong. Do you have an answer?
I do think that we're, and I think this is sort of, I don't necessarily think this is like the media industry as like in and of itself. I think this is just like the industry as a whole, when we're just too price dependent, and so we're just focusing way too much on like the speculative nature of what we're covering, which makes sense. Like everybody's, like the vast majority of people here are in it to see their bags pump, and so number go up just drives everything. And I think that I think that as media we're kind of like against the wall, because you have to report on that if you want to get the clicks, and if you want to pay the bills, and if you want to have a job, and if you want to have the resources to be able to do the more investigative side of things. But then I also think that we're complicit in it, because we're also like feeding that beast, and like markets, prices, I don't have an answer as to how I would do it any other way, because I think the business of media and the business of crypto media is also like a really weird ball game. And I'm just a journalist. I've never been in the position where I have to like manage money and figure out where to allocate resources and everything like that. So I don't know. But I do think that, we're at the behest of we're too much at the behest, or we're just responding too much to it. And like, while we fuel it,
Yeah, that's a good answer. Another thing that I thought about when you were talking about that is, I think crypto media is also like heavily skewed towards the U.S. too, which is weird, because there's all this like price action that happens in Asian hours. There's all this activity that happens outside of the world. There's a lot to write about.
There's a lot to write about. Yeah, I remember when I was at Decrypt, and I used to talk a lot to Stacy Elliott, who was my markets editor, and she was super into like Latin American stuff. And she was always like, I want to hear more about what's going on in Latin America, not just because she found it interesting, but also because there's a lot of stuff that's happening. And it's like, I mean, we just can't rely so heavily on the US either, you know? Especially like, and this is tying back to the sort of decentralization idea. It's like, if we're talking about decentralizing like money and then decentralize technology, why don't we decentralize the news as well? And just like go to other corners of the world where things are happening and figure it out and, make people think about different stuff. Like, for example, right now at Bitcoin 2024, it's like all the headliners are US politicians.
Yeah, you're right.
Except for maybe like Russell Brand.
Yeah.
But aside from that, it's senators, presidents, presidential candidates. And like, I look at it and it's like this. I mean, it frustrates me, but then once again, I understand it because you got to pay the bills, you got to drive traffic, you got to get attention. But I wonder sometimes if it's maybe just too much pragmatism, you know? Like, what are we, at the end of the day, what are we even doing? And that's another question I wanted to ask you is like, what do you think of this whole Bitcoin only versus crypto media? Although even though Bitcoin only is probably only Bitcoin Magazine and then maybe like podcasters and some other stuff. But yeah, what do you think about if there's a distinction or if there's like two different media industries?
I'm going to give you a contradictory answer in that I think it's silly for them to think that Bitcoin is separate from the crypto industry. But I also do think it makes sense to sort of like treat Bitcoin as a separate thing. So it is sort of like a special case.
Do you think every newsroom deserves to have or should have like a Bitcoin dedicated reporter or journalist?
Yeah, I think so. That is something that probably should be covered more often, like what's happening in Bitcoin Core. And I feel like a lot of publications have focused heavily on Bitcoin recently because of ordinals and all of that. But they're sort of like missing all this like weird political machinations that are happening.
And I think that there's so much going on under the hood. But I also think that, and I don't know if you agree, but I think that like Bitcoin maxis have also put it on themselves to sort of be sort of shunned away. I do think that I agree that ordinals sort of ushered in a lot of people and sort of is bridging the gap. But I also think that the desire to be different has also pushed like the whole media industry to be like, all right, if you want to be different and you want to be an outcast, be it. And that's fine by us.
I mean, that's also sort of how the world treats Bitcoin too. And there's also sort of like going back to the original ethos of Bitcoin. Like it is sort of like an opt-in thing. Like, you don't necessarily have to get everyone involved in everything. People should be able to choose what to focus on. And if they so happen to think that Bitcoin is the most important part of crypto and ignore like sort of the interesting developments that are happening outside of it, that's okay. That's okay. Because people can always change their mind too, right?
Like especially the most staunch Bitcoin maxis or like the most staunch anti-Bitcoin maxis. Like I have a lot of friends who are like anti-Bitcoin maxis.
Yeah.
And to sort of get that chip out of their mind, sometimes I wonder if it's as hard as like getting the crypto like program into a Bitcoin maxi's mind, you know? What do you think about the idea of like VC funding when it comes to media? Like, especially because like CoinDesk is controversial to say the least in this sense. And like you said at the beginning, it's undergone a massive transformation from the beginning till now. Yeah, how do you, because you also were there when they got bought, and so you probably lived through that whole transition. What was that like?
I guess I should preface this by saying that Bullish, the exchange that bought CoinDesk, has been pretty hands off in the same way that DCG has been pretty hands-off. And that may not be something that people want to believe, but there is a pretty strong firewall between editorial and business. I could sort of see the criticisms of why, like, you don't necessarily want a crypto publication owned by an exchange in particular. But at the time, I didn't have an issue with it, and I still don't. I think it's fair to say that we were sort of hanging on by a thread. But it is sort of interesting.
So you're not against then VC funding in
media? No. No. I mean, that's how the Intercept was founded. Like, I think that's just like the nature of media these days.
I mean, as journalists, we already live in a very uncertain terrain.
Yeah.
So the more stability that we can add on, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing.
It seems like you have strong feelings about it. Do you think it's a bad thing?
Not at all, actually. But I think that's a question that gets tossed around a lot. Maybe it's merely because the CoinDesk acquisition did sort of ruffle feathers and did like make people question that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think like money is always, and I think crypto is also like an odd place when it comes to where money is allocated and that sort of stuff. And there's this idea that journalism should be neutral and unbiased and that sort of thing. But I completely agree. I think adding a bit of runway to be able to keep these journalists alive and media publications alive and the news running is great.
Yeah.
Definitely not a bad thing. I suppose that's the nature, though, of it at the end of the day. Like, it's kind of like the news, there's like a constant churning of people coming in, people coming out. I also think that we tend to assume that because there's certain people financing certain things, there's no possibility of divorce. Like, I don't know where you stand on the idea of like crypto journalists owning crypto. And because, there's people who are completely against it, and then there's people who are completely in favor of it. I think that we should be able to like divorce the idea. It's like being like, I don't know, American and not being able to be critical of America, It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But so I think about it the same way when it comes to VCs, like just because a VC is funding you doesn't necessarily mean that you have to report on the whims of what the VC says.
Right.
But then at the same time, I do think, like, I don't know what's going on at the end of the day, and the conversations between editor-in-chiefs and maybe board of directors or investors or anything like that. And I assume that there is always some sort of maybe just inherent or subtle or indirect pressure heading down.
Yeah. That is an interesting question, though, about whether reporters should be able to own crypto, because in a lot of ways you cannot report on crypto without owning crypto, because you can't use crypto without owning crypto. Like that's just how these protocols work. Like, you need to pay to use them. I err on the more conservative side. Like, I don't own very much Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana, but I do have like wallets with like probably collectively thousands of dollars, right? Like, but I sort of I was more comfortable owning crypto when I was like just sort of a straight news reporter at the very beginning. And when I developed into being a columnist, that's when I sort of made the decision to sell off most of my holdings, because I did actually sort of feel it personally influencing like the way that I was thinking about particular protocols. Like, if I'm going to have opinions, then they probably shouldn't be financially motivated. But now that I'm at the block, I basically like still just sort of like have what I have.
Right.
It's not very much. But yeah, I think like you need to own a little bit, like at the bare minimum.
Yeah. I mean, you need to interact with it at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
And to interact with it, you need to own it. And whether, it's a lot or a little, I suppose that goes down to everybody's like personal ethics to a degree, or like ability to sort of separate waters.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually, yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Because I'm not against other reporters like being heavily invested in crypto. Because I think it's sometimes a good thing for people to be like extremely gung ho about this stuff, and to care about it.
What do you consider like one of the best reporters? Like, what are the like scoops, writing style, ability to discern facts? What goes into becoming like a great journalist or great reporter?
Yeah, I think just like being able to generate original stories, like being involved in DAOs or like following those forums.
Would you like to see that also from like crypto media or like traditional media? Would you like to see traditional media get more involved in crypto, or do you think that their role is not always, but like is primarily to be from the outside looking in, and that serves a purpose in and of itself?
I think it's okay for these sort of like long-standing publications to like look at this very nascent field sort of skeptically. I think that is beneficial.
But surely there's times that you get upset at traditional media about how they report on things, or do you just think it's just part of what they do and how they are?
I don't know. I have one of those like old school stupid beliefs about crypto where like if Bitcoin can't survive an attack from the New York Times, then like Bitcoin shouldn't exist.
Like, it's funny because we always talk about we should be surviving attacks and we should be like resilient, but then when we get attacked, it's like we're almost appalled that we're just getting attacked. We're not even like thinking about the attack itself. It's like, how are you even attacking us?
Yeah. Oh, so a person that I talk to a lot, a professor at the University of Dublin, this guy Paul Dillon Ennis, he has this theory that like crypto is basically just a social club, like, and that is basically what matters most about crypto. The tech is cool. The tech, it's a good thing that it exists, probably, and it's a good thing that like Ethereum is resilient. But like the main thing that Ethereum produces is culture, is people, like, is just this sort of hive mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great theory.
Yeah,
I mean, it makes total sense, and it's. I think it's especially important, or it makes even more sense given like the atomization of society because of the internet, and so to get like an internet-based protocol or an internet-based culture sort of bring us back together. I think that totally makes sense. Do you think that there's too much tribalism though, despite obviously the sort of hive mind mentality?
It's fun though, right? It's like sports teams. It's like, I don't know what camp you're on, but I feel sort of separated from it a lot of the time. So just like inside looking in, it is sort of funny watching like Bitcoiners versus Ethereans butting heads. Probably long term, it is a bad thing because like if what you're optimizing for is mass adoption, it's just sort of like a vitriolic scene.
Well, I suppose it's also because of the stage we're in. As it grows bigger, it'll get more diverse, and like those small dissenting, like intransigent majority or minorities are just going to slowly like wean out. At least that's what I think eventually. But then again, you don't know. Like, I don't know if you know Troy Cross. And
oh yeah.
So he just published a study yesterday, or I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, like super academic, super rigorous research. I think like 3,200 people or something like that.
Oh.
And and he did like a whole political spectrum sort of thing. And it turned out that only 3% of libertarians or 3% of Bitcoiners considered themselves libertarian. And then the vast majority were moderates. And then, and like a lot of really revealing insight that was just like completely blew my mind. And it just made me question, like, the amount of power or the amount of like noise that these tiny minorities can wield in this industry is insane. Because it's only one study with only 3,200 people, but still it's like a study with a fair amount of people. The fact that just 3% can make everybody think, because if you're on the outside and you're looking in, you think to yourself, man, these are all libertarians, right? These are all mad, these are all like Trump supporters, or just like, hate the state, whatever you want to call it. But in reality, it's not like that at all. Like, there's a huge progressive community. I think Ordinals is also bringing in a completely different style of person, artist, like activist. But yeah, I sort of attribute it to the size of the industry for now. I expect that to sort of, that small group of people that's very loud and very vocal to eventually like fade away. And I choose to believe at least.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've completely missed that study.
It literally came out yesterday. Was it yesterday or Monday? But yeah, just in these past couple of days.
Oh.
I suppose Troy will talk about it at some point at the conference. And yeah, him and like the guys from Resistance Money, they take that approach, don't they? Like, sort of, let's bring some more academia into it and like do a bit more rigorous study, rather than he commented this and they commented that, and then because it got 1,000 likes, that's what's the truth. I don't know. I think that's a great way to. I always end this conversation, or end these sort of conversations, asking the same two questions. And I think that because like, I'm waiting for Resistance Money, the book, to come to arrive in my mailbox back home. And I always ask, what book are you reading now? And what book do you usually recommend? Or are you recommending lately? It can be crypto related, it can be fiction, Russian literature, whatever you want. Yeah.
The Overstory is very interesting.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'd recommend it. It's very, it's just very beautifully written. It's hard to describe. But for people that are interested in crypto, I'd recommend this book by Jennifer Egan called The Candy House, which is sort of like a collection of vignettes. The first one in particular, like, is really about the internet. But like, you could argue the entire thing is sort of about like, it's sort of about like the crypto project. It's very good.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And then do you have any recommendations that go beyond crypto?
The Tao of Pooh.
The Tao of Pooh?
Yeah, very short. It's like an introduction of Taoism, but told through like the perspective of Winnie the Pooh. It's very approachable, very cute. It'll change your life, I think.
Wow, big words. That's a bold statement. And yeah, great moment to end on. The life-changing Winnie the Pooh book for the world. But yeah, Dan, thanks heaps for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, likewise.
And yeah, you gave me a lot of food for thought. Thanks.
Excellent.